This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 251 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we're going to learn a set of strategies you can use to guide students toward using AI tools with integrity. Since ChatGPT burst onto the scene in late 2022, the number one concern I've heard from teachers about AI is that students would never do their own writing again, that they would just have AI do it for them. While this is obviously a valid concern, I've heard a lot of conversations recently that tell me teachers are coming up with some pretty nuanced solutions to this problem. Many of you have accepted that AI isn't going anywhere, that it could, in fact, even help you do your work better, and that maybe the most pragmatic approach is to coexist with it, to treat it like any other source students might use to complete academic tasks. To date, the most thoughtful and comprehensive take I've seen on this topic came from my guest today, Tony Frontier. Tony is an educator, speaker, and author whose most recent book is AI with Intention: Principles and Action Steps for Teachers and School Leaders. He has written an in-depth article for Cult of Pedagogy this week that outlines a set of practices we can use to ensure our students are still doing their academic work with integrity, even with the constant presence of AI. I think there's a lot of value in what he has to share. He poses some provocative questions about cheating versus integrity. He clearly captures some of the conditions that make students more likely to cheat. And he offers a set of practical, realistic suggestions that respect the teacher-student relationship and put our focus squarely on helping our students learn. And he wraps it all inside a Boston Marathon scandal from the past. It's one of my longer episodes, but it's such an interesting conversation. Any educator working in the age of AI will get some valuable stuff from it. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Explore Learning for sponsoring this episode. Are you evaluating new STEM education technology? There's a lot to consider, but one critical piece that can't be overlooked is data privacy. Explore Learning K-12 STEM solutions are certified safe with high standard data security measures. Build critical STEM skills with EdTech you can trust. From early science explorations to foundational math skills like math fact fluency and fractions, to virtual labs and simulations where students take on the role of STEM professionals. Research proven and full of games students love, Explore Learning products support student success. They're committed to learning that's serious fun with serious safeguards educators can rely on to protect student data. Visit cultofpedagogy.com/explore learning to see the data privacy behind Explore Learning's award-winning products. Support also comes from ListenWise and their new product, LingoLift. Designed for newcomers and beginning-level English learners in grades 2 through 12, LingoLift builds the foundational social and academic language that newcomers need. Their large collection of short educational videos teaches content and language together, and their unique Watch, Learn, Speak instructional sequence and teacher's guides offer a powerful yet flexible tool for building newcomer skills as quickly as possible. Now, ListenWise has something for students at every level of English language acquisition. Try out LingoLift today when you start a free trial at listenwise.com. Now here's my conversation with Tony Frontier about academic integrity and AI. Hey, Tony.
Hi, Jen. Great to be here.
Thank you for joining me. We have worked for a while now. You've written a really fantastic guest post about kids and AI and this whole idea of cheating. So we're going to get into that in a minute. But before we do, tell us just a little bit about the work that you do in education.
Sure. Yeah, I do consulting work with primarily K-12 schools and districts on curriculum design, assessment, and doing a lot more with AI and technology of late. But I started my career teaching in Milwaukee Public Schools. I taught middle school there and absolutely loved it. It also challenged me to get good at teaching pretty quick, and learned a lot from those first groups of kids I worked with. But from there, I was an associate principal in a suburban Milwaukee school district,
Hmm.
and I was the curriculum director in that district for 10 years. Then went into teach higher ed and do consulting work. And for about, 13, 14 years, taught doctoral students and principals and people who ran not for profits on adult learning theory and assessment and a number of other pieces. And I'm just doing the consulting work full time.
Okay. Tell me about your new book, AI with Intention: Principles and Action Steps for Teachers and School Leaders. This is obviously a very, very hot topic. And I haven't covered it that much on my site because I
Okay,
keep looking for good angles. So,
great. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So this is my sixth book, fifth with ASCD.
Hmm.
And the gist of the book is AI is new. We're in a transformational age, and what we know about effective leadership and what we know about how students learn, that is not changing. So how we use AI tools really truly needs to be informed by what we know about effective leadership. I talk about four guiding principles and strategic choices that leaders need to make, and what we know about effective teaching. And I talk about four guiding principles, strategic choices, and action steps that teachers can take. But kind of the bottom line of the book, if you look at innovation, or if you look at challenges um, in teaching and learning or in schools over the years, how we respond to change is often more important than the change itself.
Hmm.
So AI tools have unbelievable capacity to change and in many ways improve teaching and learning. But
Hmm.
they also will have the unbelievable capacity to undermine a lot of how students learn and effective teaching. So, right, how do we, discern what are those effective practices and put those into action? Jay McTighe wrote the foreword for the book. Jay's work on understanding by design. I've been a huge fan of his work for years and
Me
had the
too.
opportunity to write some with him and do some work with him. And so he graciously agreed to write the foreword.
Yeah, that's a ringing endorsement to have him writing your forward. Yeah. So, what you have written for Cult of Pedagogy, which people listening to this will be able to read this right now, is called Catch Them Learning: A Pathway to Academic Integrity in the Age of AI. And as soon as I started to hear about, I feel like when ChatGPT burst onto the scene, that was when a lot of people started paying really close attention to AI. And the big concern among teachers is kids are never going to write their own papers again. They're going to just submit cheated stuff. I just talked to a kid last night who's in school, and he's like, yeah, I use ChatGPT all the time. And I kind of dug into it a little bit, and I said, do you just copy it whole cloth? And he said, no, 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 I just use it to get started. And I was like, well, that's good. So you're framing this post, which has a lot of suggestions that we're going to get into for the ways that teachers can approach working with student writers and AI. But you're framing all of this through the story of somebody named Rosie Ruiz, who was a marathon runner, and in the early '80s. So let's begin with the story of Rosie Ruiz. And what is this story?
Yeah. We learn through stories, right? And I'm always looking for stories that, provide good, metaphors for
Mm-hmm.
reality that we currently face. And I feel this story is one that matches up really well with some of the challenges and opportunities that we face right now. So the story is essentially this: Rosie Ruiz won the Boston Marathon back in 1980, and she crosses the finish line, and they put the laurel wreath over her head and give her the medal. And but very shortly after that, people who knew marathoning well started to question those results. When Rosie Ruiz was interviewed in the post race, kind of interview circle, Catherine Switzer, she was a marathoner, and she asked Rosie some questions about her training, about what she saw on the course, and it was really clear that she had no idea uh, about marathoning or how to train for a marathon or some of
Mm.
the specific things that anyone who ran the course would have noticed. So as the story unfolded a bit further, she was big investigation took place, and they looked through thousands of pictures, and they couldn't find her anywhere on the course
Mm.
until right at the end of the course. So there was no definitive proof that she'd cheated, but there was also no definitive proof that she'd run the race. A number of eyewitnesses came forward and said they saw her coming out of the crowd with about a mile or so left. But when she crossed the finish line, she wasn't really sweating.
Hmm.
The pace she was going was nowhere near the almost world record pace that she was running. So
Mm-hmm.
so this raised a number of other questions about how she qualified for the race, and this was a huge national news story at the time. And someone from New York saw this story, and she Ruiz had qualified for the Boston Marathon by finishing 11th place in New York. And
Mm-hmm.
someone came forward who had been on the subway with Ruiz during the race and had talked to her along a 16-mile stretch of the New York City Marathon. It turned out Ruiz had, she gets off the subway, she goes to the medical tent. She'd told this woman she'd sprained her ankle. And when she gets to the medical tent for treatment, she says, "Oh, I finished the race, but no one recorded my time." And so they got a race official, and they basically said, "Well, when did you cross?" And she told them a time, and that was good enough for 11th place. So the whole thing kind of came cascading down. She was disqualified from the New York Marathon, which allowed them to disqualify her from from Boston. But one thing that is known about Ruiz, she received a lot of support from her place of work when she
Mm.
was preparing for the New York Marathon. They were very excited that she was running, and lots of encouragement. And she told them, she expected to do well, and she didn't want to disappoint them. She knew they'd be looking for her time
Mm-hmm.
in the in the newspapers on Monday. And in fact, when she across the finish line in Boston. She had a MTI, or Metals Training Institute, the place where she worked. She was wearing that T-shirt because she was, representing her place of work with pride.
Mm.
So, kind of the metaphor, and what I think is illuminating about that story. Again, this is 1980. It's not a
Yeah.
time when there are security cameras everywhere, and
Right.
so. But she had access to a technology, right, that allowed her to cross the finish line in a way that did not represent her actual work. And that notion of, how do we ensure integrity and prevent cheating when the technology that people have access to exceeds the technology we have to police that, for lack of a better
Mm.
word.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are a lot of parallels to how we can best respond and support students today from that Ruiz anecdote.
From that story. Yeah. So, one of the things that you talk about early on in this piece is that an important sort of framing that we need to get our heads wrapped around is the difference between cheating and integrity. So, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and it's more than just semantic. It is
Mm-hmm.
really important. So cheating, I talk about as, when we use a tool or a resource to misrepresent our own knowledge, our own skill, in order to receive credit.
Mm-hmm.
So if cheating occurs, someone from the outside needs to essentially, right, accuse the cheater.
Yeah.
So what's important about that definition is the notion that, if you're just out for a run on a Sunday, or you're just, using the internet to write silly songs or learn about something, no one's going to accuse you of cheating, right? The
Right.
cheating piece comes in when we're using that tool or resource to misrepresent our results.
Yeah.
So the distinction then that's important is that integrity is very different from cheating. Integrity is essentially a commitment, to ensure that one's work accurately represents
Mm-hmm.
one's level of skill and understanding. So, a claim about integrity, really needs to be supported by the individual, right? How does your work, or how do these results demonstrate your true capacity or your true ability? But they're also the responsibility of, the teacher, or the people who constructed the race course, or right, because the notion of integrity is, if you do well on a task or an
Mm-hmm.
assessment,
Mm-hmm.
that the teacher can say, because you did well on this task, it provides evidence to me that you understand, right, certain content, or you have the
Right.
capacity to accomplish certain skills. And the key to the distinction, and I don't hear a lot of people differentiating cheating and integrity when they're talking about AI tools, is just because a student is using an AI tool, right, does not mean they are cheating.
Mm-hmm.
And a student can do academic work honestly and openly, but that doesn't mean that assessment evidence has integrity.
Mm.
So, in other words, right, if we think about Wiggins and McTighe's activities without understanding, and an
Yes.
article of yours that I love and I've shared with a million teachers, the Grecian Urn article,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So if I design an assessment task that is supposed to give me evidence about students' understanding of ancient Greece, but the product is completely disconnected, right, from any understanding of
Yeah.
ancient Greece, that assessment evidence doesn't have integrity, right? That doesn't
Right.
mean a student who does that has cheated.
Yeah.
It means the evidence doesn't represent what we claim it represents,
Right.
and that's a challenging thing for teachers to do. I mean, getting assessment right is really difficult, because the essence is, I construct or design a task that a student can do, and as that student does that task, they're building the skills, the understanding, right? Engaging in the productive struggle that's necessary to acquire that skill,
Right.
right? And, we can give kids assessments that, emphasize too much trivia, and the kids can just memorize things or be familiar with answers, and 2 weeks
Mm-hmm.
later they forget. Or we can give activities, that aren't well aligned to what our actual intentions are
Mm-hmm.
for learning. So that's challenging no matter what. Now put AI tools in the mix that are almost impossible for kids to avoid. And what I mean by that is, any middle school kid, high school kid, right, if they're opening up, a PDF, or they're on the internet, can I summarize this for you? Would you like help with your writing?
Mm.
That's just kind of the default. And it's going to be more accessible and more ubiquitous. So that notion of, okay, I know this student crossed the finish line,
Yeah.
but does the fact that they crossed the finish line truly mean that they have the capacity to train for and run a marathon, right? And
Yeah.
that's where we need to untangle some of these pieces. So if we're going to go about trying to police, AI use by catching kids cheating and
Mm.
accusing kids of cheating,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not saying that sometimes that doesn't need to happen, but that's exhausting. And none
Mm.
of us got into teaching
Mm.
to be a guest star on Law and Order. We're there to support kids and their learning. So what I talk about in the article is just, so how do we emphasize integrity? How
Mm.
do we minimize the conditions where cheating might occur? And
Mm-hmm.
really, how do we put the onus on the student
Mm.
to be able to, step up to the microphone in that post race interview
Mm.
and say, here's what I learned, here's what I did, here's what I was thinking, here's what I'm thinking now. These are the most important parts of my work,
Right.
because that's the essence of assessment.
So what you've done then in this article is give teachers a really robust handful of practices and also sort of mindsets that can help us in this age of, because I do hear a lot of conversations about what software can I use to detect AI use? And it's all
Yeah,
about catching them
yeah,
cheating. And so what we're going to do in the rest of this conversation is just go through and I'll read these to you and then you can explain them,
great.
these suggestions for teachers. So the first one is to acknowledge the limits of detecting and accusing students of cheating. So let's talk about that to start with.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, there are plagiarism detection tools out there, and they work with various levels of success, but they're not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the shorter the passage of text, the less reliable those
Mm,
tools are. And really a lot of work that students do. I mean, yes, students write essays, but a lot of the work that they do is just the day to day, answering some comprehension questions or
yeah.
reflection questions, or doing some math problems. And those things are very difficult to detect, and plagiarism tools again aren't perfect. So a piece that I've been following for a while, and found very interesting is, there's some research out of Stanford that has shown, both before and since the release of ChatGPT 3.5, rates of student cheating, they really haven't changed that much
Mm,
in student self reports.
mm-hmm.
Um, it's just gotten easier, but
Yeah.
the notion that because of AI kids are cheating, that just doesn't hold
Mm-hmm.
water.
It's just another way of doing it.
It just exactly
Right.
it,
They
it
used to copy and paste from the internet, and now the
Yep.
internet's kind of doing that for them.
Yep, exactly. It's
Yeah.
just another way of doing it. And I know a lot of schools have kind of ramped up. I mean, either policy language, or really try to make it clear to kids that you can't cheat, but there can be a real paradoxical effect to, if we say, anyone who uses these tools in any way, and if you get caught, you'll get an F in the class. And
Mm-hmm.
well, that kind of raises the stakes, right? That
Mm.
that makes it, in a lot of ways, I think, less likely that a teacher is going to come forward and make that accusation. As a teacher, as a school administrator, as a district office administrator, and a college professor, I've been involved in mediating accusation and issues of student cheating, and it's exhausting all the way
Yeah.
around. It's
Yeah.
exhausting, because it really can pit kids against teachers, and kids perceive it, or parents perceive it to be teachers against kids. And
Mm-hmm.
again, none of us got into this business to do battle and lawyer up essentially.
Right.
um,
Right. And I think it's because these policies have been made to try to scare kids into not using it.
right.
And so they've been made super, super scary, which means that's going to decrease the likelihood that somebody's going to accuse somebody because the stakes are so high.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So your advice there is before we even get into any of the other strategies is just to recognize that there are pretty significant limits to even proving this to begin with, and the stakes are so high that going the going the route of accusing someone of cheating and trying to catch them and then penalize them is kind of a losing game most of the time, that there are probably better ways of handling this problem than that.
Yep, we need clear boundaries, yes, and
Mhm.
we need clear policies, and we
Mhm.
need to uh, you know make that leap sometimes,
Mhm.
and ensure kids are held accountable if they are cheating.
Mhm.
But that can't be that can't be the primary way of
Right.
trying to ensure integrity. Absolutely,
Yeah. And the rest of what you're going to suggest here is, I think, much more nuanced, more sophisticated, and is also dealing in reality much more
exactly.
soundly than the just let's catch them and punish. So that brings us to number 2, which is minimize conditions where cheating is most likely to occur. And I love this one because I think this basically solves the problem at the root.
Yep. And
So
yep.
yeah, let's hear about that.
Great. Yeah. And that's where we need to address it. There's a lot of research out there on why students cheat. There's a great resource from Challenge Success. Google it. It's through Stanford.
Okay.
They're a great organization. Kids don't just cheat because they're bad, or because they're,
Mm,
because they're naughty, or because they don't know, they didn't know it was wrong. But students are more likely to cheat when they face unrealistic expectations to achieve. Going back to Rosie,
mm,
right? She didn't have a prayer of placing well in either of those marathons, but
yeah.
she created some undue pressure and expectation to do well. High expectations for kids,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, but realistic high expectations
Mm,
with a clear
mm-hmm.
path to get there is more important. Students are more likely to cheat when they believe they're anonymous. Part of what it looks like, Ruiz realized coming out of New York and going into Boston is that in all the chaos and all the people and all the,
Yeah.
people don't really notice. Now, if she hadn't finished first, maybe they never would have noticed. But,
Right.
when kids don't think their teacher knows what they're capable of, right? When
Yeah.
kids think they're just turning in work and it's getting assessed, anonymously, they're more likely to cheat. Students are more likely to cheat when they lack the time to produce quality results. So we know that kids are pretty good about underestimating the amount of time it's
Yes.
going to take to learn
Mm-hmm.
things. Right, but that's part of why they're with us, right? They're a work in progress.
Yeah.
And when we set up, projects or expectations that kids may see as ambiguous, or we give them long timelines and just kind of assume they're getting the work done or know how to do
Yep.
the work incrementally behind the scenes, they're more likely to cheat. I've known a lot of student focus groups lately as a part of a separate project, and I've heard a few times from kids essentially, and I'm not saying I agree with this statement. I'm saying it objectively, but
Mm.
essentially, I've heard a number of times different schools, different kids make comments along the lines of, if they want us to do essentially high quality work,
Mm.
then they need to teachers need to do a better job of not giving us busy work, of helping us focus on what's most important.
Mm.
I mean, almost an attitude of, yeah, if you want that 15-page paper or that massive project and you haven't really helped us all the way through,
Yeah.
what do you expect me to do?
Right.
And again, I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that's therefore the kids are right, but
Mm,
from
I
their
I agree with it
perspective,
though, especially if you're
yeah,
talking about a 15-year-old kid that has never really
correct,
done any serious academic writing to expect that they're going to be able to just produce that
correct. The
without a lot
logic,
of guidance. I was a
yeah,
writing teacher, so I feel like we should be shepherding them through every phase of the writing process and not just saying do it. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. The
Yeah.
logic, the logic there is pretty sound. And then the final piece is, students are more likely to cheat when we emphasize performance goals rather than learning goals. In other words, if
Mhm.
kids think the whole game is get the points, get the grade, get the
Yeah.
check mark,
Mhm.
rather than thinking, okay, I'm trying to learn how to do this certain skill, and
Mhm.
here's some questions I have. And but if kids think wrong answers are, essentially a source of punishment rather than an
Yeah.
opportunity to learn, they'll do what they need to do to avoid giving wrong answers.
Yep.
The point I make in the book is, we've got 10,000 plus years of history where people have used tools to accomplish work of value with less effort. So if all the kid thinks is of value is the grade, then it's a pretty logical choice to pursue that with as
Right.
little effort as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, I'm not saying therefore that's okay, but
Right.
how do we help kids structure their goals? Do we create those incremental intentional opportunities where it's okay to make mistakes? It's okay to not know. It's okay to revise your thinking. Because when kids know that they're going to be supported in their efforts, and their teachers, don't kind of respond to them as though you should know this already, they're more likely to come and ask for help. And that's
Right.
what we want, right? We want our students to be in that space where it's okay for them to say they don't know. And conversely, we want our students to understand that the greatest joy we can experience as teachers is when our kids ask us questions that we don't know the answers to,
Mm.
right? When they're that deep into it, that they're really wondering. And
Yeah.
we're like, that's a great question. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So those are cultural, right?
Yeah. Well, and all of these conditions, I also just want to, for the benefit of the audience, because you're listing a lot of conditions that make it more likely that students are going to cheat. And in a little bit, we're actually going to get into more things to do
Yep,
to sort
absolutely.
of rule out some of those conditions or minimize those conditions. So
Yep.
one of the areas that you are advising that we put more focus, this is number 3,
Hmm.
is to emphasize integrity by focusing on transparency, explainability, and relationships. There's a
Yep.
lot there. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
unpack that however you like.
Yep, yeah. So three big ideas there.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want integrity, we need to have clear expectations and opportunities for kids to demonstrate transparency.
Mm-hmm.
So this occurs when students know that they'll be asked to document the steps, the resources
Mm-hmm.
that they've used in order to produce work. And I think a good byproduct of the conversations that have been happening around AI and appropriate use, I think very rarely have we put systems in place where we ask kids, did you do this work independently? Did you do this work with others? Did your parents help you with this
Mm-hmm.
work?
Mm-hmm.
Because whether it's an AI tool or a mom or a dad or an aunt or an uncle or
Yep.
a classmate, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to know. We want that child to be able to say, I did this work, but the only reason I was able to do it was because I got help from someone.
Yeah.
Because if I don't have that information, right, as a teacher, I can't be responsive to their needs.
Mm-hmm.
So that notion of transparency, it's not just, are you citing your sources in your formal research papers? It's, we need to be clear. Here's what resources you can or can't use and how you should or shouldn't use them. But document. If you used photomath to get through your homework last night, I need to know that so
Mm-hmm.
I can adjust my teaching accordingly.
And
So
the way that you
yeah.
just said that too is so different from how I hear a lot of teachers talking. You're saying I need to know that as someone who cares about your learning and needs to be able to help you fill in gaps in your understanding, which, and I don't blame teachers for getting to this point because I think a lot of us get very jaded and it's an us versus them and I'm going to catch you and you better
Hmm.
not try to. And it's this whole idea too that parents and friends and other things, I mean, if the kid learns the stuff by the end,
Hmm.
who really cares if they found it on their own through a textbook or whether they just had a conversation with a knowledgeable person? Do they have the knowledge at the end? Yes. And
Right.
can they be transparent about how they got to where they got? And
Exactly.
did they
Yeah.
actually get there or does it just look like they got there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the explainability piece. So
Right.
okay, I've got this work in front of me,
Mm-hmm.
and it looks like the student understands, right? The
Right.
student crossed the finish line. Okay,
Yes.
but did they
Yes.
run all 26.2 miles? So explainability. This is the notion that can the kid explain their work,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if they got the right answers, that doesn't necessarily mean they understand, right?
Right.
If and just what you just said. So So now we're in that space of asking questions where, and this can be exit slips. This can be, some short prompts that I talk about a bit more in one of the other action steps. But think of it as that post race interview, right?
Yeah.
What are the questions you would need to ask that student? Not because you're interrogating them, right? By then it's too late,
Mm.
but because you want to know if they really understand. And even more powerfully, they know that you want to know that they understand.
Yeah.
So, questions, 25-word summary statements, or what's a question that you couldn't answer yesterday that you can answer today?
Mm.
Or, what's the most important thing to know about blank? Or,
Mm-hmm.
right, those types of questions, just uh, quick snippets that help do two things. They help kids, really understand that, no, this isn't just about getting her done and turning it in. My teacher really wants to know if I understand.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one piece, and then it gives you information, so you can teach more. You can teach more effectively.
Right.
And I just think we're going to have to do that much more often, much more intentionally,
Mm-hmm.
to ensure kids assessment evidence has integrity. But I want to underscore that piece, though. If the only time I'm asking kids, hey, how did you do this, did you have any help on this, tell me what are you trying to say, if the only time we ask those kids questions is when, because they think we're accusing them of cheating,
Yeah.
we've lost the game. We've
Right.
lost the game.
Right. And also just, I don't think I've ever been asked that question either as a student. And I'm thinking of what an intellectually rich environment I would find myself in if we're having those kinds of conversations,
Mm-hmm.
all the way along the process of a project, and also just learning how other people are learning and how they're getting to, I mean, it's just a completely different kind of an environment than just, I have this thing to do. Um, and I'm looking forward. I want to let people listening know that you are going to be getting to like really applicable strategies for applying all of these
Absolutely.
mind
Yep.
shifts. Yeah. Let's get to the relationship piece before we leave
Oh yeah.
this one,
Yep.
because that goes the third part.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and
Yeah.
again, it ties back to that culture piece.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the etymology of the word assessment is sit beside. It's something we do with students, not something we do to students. And
Mm.
if I haven't established some of that relational trust with students, they might not think it's okay to say they don't understand. They might not feel comfortable
Yeah.
coming to
Yep.
me and asking for asking for help. So just that notion of knowing something about your students, ensuring your students know you have high expectations, and you balance that with adequate support to get kids there, increases the likelihood that they're going to come to us when they're stuck, when they're confused. And if they know that we know what they're capable of, right? If a kid turns in work that just doesn't seem like it's theirs,
Mm-hmm.
if the kids know that, well, they know what I'm capable of. Not because we want kids to feel threatened or underperform, but for kids to know this is my best effort right now, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where I am, and let's
Yeah.
go from there, right?
Right.
Rather than I'm going to cheat, you're probably not going to notice anyway, and I can get the grade. That's what we want
Mm.
to prevent.
That feeling of you're probably not going to notice anyway, that's not a great feeling to have when you're in a class and you
Right,
feel that it's not even going to be noticed. Yeah.
right. And the biggest, just one more piece to talk about the book before we get to the specific action steps. My worst fear with AI is that we end up in a space where teachers are creating assignments and assessments using AI. Kids are using AI to do those assignments and
Yeah.
assessments. Teachers are using AI to assess
That's it.
and grade those assessments, right?
Yeah.
And it looks like stuff's actually going on, right? I mean, the grade book's getting
Right.
filled, but
Oh
all
my
we're doing is
gosh.
training an AI model. We're
Yeah.
that and 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 I see instances of that happening already,
Yep.
which is a whole separate
Yeah.
conversation. But
Yeah, that's not at all a crazy fantasy that like that. I
yeah,
can see that absolutely happening, and it is very dystopian. And
yes,
why are we even here doing this? So, Yeah, let's get into these strategies. So this is
Yep.
number 4, where we sort of pull all of that
Mm-hmm.
into actionable things. So 4 is use strategies that support integrity, maximize learning, and minimize cheating.
Yep.
Um, so this first section of these is
Yep.
aligning expectations with opportunities to learn.
Yep. Yeah.
What does that look like?
The greater the alignment, between what we say are our priorities and students' learning opportunities, right? The better students can pursue and achieve rigorous goals. So this includes things like, sharing the map of the course
Mm-hmm.
in advance, right? Kids should have long time horizons about where we're headed and
Mm-hmm.
why, how we're going to get there. Communicating major assignments and assessments well in advance,
Mm-hmm.
but then also breaking those down into smaller incremental steps, planning and pre-writing, or incremental study loops, repeated practice, right? We
Mm-hmm.
can't just assume that kids are doing those things or know how to do those things.
Yeah.
We really need to explicitly, break those down. Aligning formative tasks with summative goals.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of schools and teachers working on initiatives related to project-based learning, and when done well,
Mm-hmm.
right, choice and voice without competence are just setting kids up for failure. So
Yep.
if we want to give kids choices, if we want to do different projects, we want kids to have different ways to show us what they know, that's great. But if when it's said and done, we haven't taught the kids the skills they need or directed them to, start to develop the skills they need to do that project or task, then kind of makes sense that they'd turn to an AI tool to do it for them.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many projects I've seen recently where, again, the intentions are great, that poster, that storybook, that whatever it may be,
Mm.
but I was just with some teachers the other day, and they were talking about the project they wanted to do, and I said, would a good student example look like this? And I'd prompted, an AI tool as we were talking, and it generated a picture of what the project they were discussing was.
Mm.
Right. So I typed one sentence, and I I got it.
Yeah.
Right. That
Yeah.
that can't be. So we need to align, right? When we need to give rubrics in advance, we need to ensure those rubrics focus on the most important attributes of quality. If we've got words in rubrics, have we taught lessons, right, related to the language of those
Right.
rubrics, right? Have we
Yes.
given kids the chance for formative feedback on those components? And when we break projects and so on into smaller tasks, right? When kids know that we know the planning that they've been doing, and they have some class time to do that planning, and
Mm-hmm.
we can see the incremental steps, right? They're far less likely to try to just jump in at the end of the race and cross the finish line, but they hadn't run the 26 miles.
I want to jump down actually because the fourth thing that you have in this is about these checkpoints, and this seems like a natural place to
Mm-hmm.
go anyway, because if
Mm-hmm.
teachers are listening, they're thinking, so does that mean that I actually have? So let's do that. You're talking about acknowledging progress at checkpoints.
Yep. So that notion of, if we're breaking projects into smaller steps, deadlines,
Mm-hmm.
we're asking kids to do some of the planning along
Mm-hmm.
the way. We're asking kids to show us or turn in, right? What have you done so far? Let's say students are working on some type of writing, and it's extended. We need that assignment at some point where we're going to workshop one paragraph from your
Mm-hmm.
writing and spend some
Mm-hmm.
time and do some revisions. And then, I want to know, right? So, what was your takeaway from today's workshop, right? How does that apply? How does that apply to the rest of your essay, right? What's one
Yeah.
thing you're going to focus on? We need to get into those metacognitive processes that are central to learning, and we've got to make that visible, to pull on some of Hattie's language. Quick checks for understanding. some of what I alluded to before. Those quick exit slips, those quick prompts related to learning goals, not just tasks, where kids know it's okay to say, "Here's where I am now,"
Mm,
and right, we gather those up. It doesn't take a lot of time.
right.
We can flip through, start the next day. You know, here's a misunderstanding that I heard, saw on a number of your exit slips, or here's a question that came up in a number of your exit slips. Right?
Hmm.
Let's talk about let's talk about this. The work that is most worth doing always takes multiple steps and multiple iterations and being responsive to feedback, and just we need to build that in, right? We need to build that in, because if we don't, kids now have access to a tool that will do it for them, and it will
Yeah.
do it for them in a way that they can completely avoid the productive struggle that's the essence of learning.
Hmm.
And we've got to let them know that we want to be a part of that productive
Yeah.
struggle, because it's important.
I want to underscore something that you are saying here. And this sort of actually goes back to Wiggins and McTighe. The idea of planning formative assessments that align with the summative, it seems so obvious, but I don't think enough of us do this, especially when we're talking about major high point value assignments that require a lot of work. I don't think enough teachers are thinking, I want them to be able to do this at the end, what are the skills? What are the mini lessons we need to be doing? What are the little checks that we need to be doing? Not just have you made progress, but even, little quick skill checks and lessons to see, do they know how to cite their sources elegantly in a paragraph? Do they, and they don't. So building building these checkpoints, this is why I wanted to pull that one up to the beginning,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
these checkpoints don't just happen spontaneously. They could all be planned out based on what you want them to be able to do at the end, which is a backward design thing.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. There's always content, concepts, and skills, and we can become so focused, I think, on our content that
Hmm.
that we forget that kids also need instruction on those conceptual underpinnings,
Yeah.
and we can become, our expertise prevents us from seeing how complex the
Mm.
skills are that we're asking kids to do.
Yeah.
And even in my book, Teaching with Clarity, even think of words like summarize, analyze, synthesize, or describe, explain. Right? Those words all, they mean really different things.
Yeah.
Right? And oftentimes we can put those words into assignments or tasks, it's almost like we don't even realize that they're there, and
Yeah.
then that's what the kid gets stuck on, right? So
Hmm.
it's like, gee, I taught this unit so well, but the kids really got, well, if you stand and look at that assessment through the kids' eyes, that there were some pieces there that maybe they didn't have a chance to receive instruction on or feedback around.
And I have to say this, and I know I'm coming from an English language arts perspective, but I do think that if we are expecting communication skills in the other areas of school to deliver that evidence of learning, then those areas of study need to be incorporating, this is what it looks like in a science piece of writing, how
Right.
you do that. And I think all of us as teachers, we know what it looks like, but a lot of teachers in the other content areas haven't been pushed to address that stuff in their classes.
Right.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
doesn't have to take a ton of time even, but it should be some time allotted to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, okay, so now we will swing back to
Okay.
your other recommendation. Another recommendation is affirm students at the starting line.
Yep. So, kids need to know that we know and accept their starting point, right?
Mhm.
So this can include things like, interest inventories, just little questions about kids'
Mhm.
interests, aspirations.
Mhm.
I think baseline interest or baseline evidence of writing skills. Asking
Mhm.
kids to write a paragraph in science, in math, in right, that maybe pulls in broadly the topic that's being studied, but
Mhm.
you don't want it to become an assessment of the content, right? But
Yeah.
for us to see and for kids to know that we've read, right?
Mm.
This student thinks really clearly and logically and linearly, or
Yeah.
wow, this student's writing skills are way off, and but then just quick feedback. I thanks for sharing your interest on blank.
Mm-hmm.
Your writing is really solid, or we need to work on organization of ideas. That's
Mm-hmm.
something we're going to address this year, right? Because if kids know I see them, right, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
applauding them, but I
Mm-hmm.
see them at the starting line, they know that I have realistic expectations about the progress that they can make. And again, I'm not saying low expectations, I'm saying
Mm.
high expectations,
Mm-hmm.
but it's got to be high expectations. They've got to be realistic, and we have to balance the challenge and support necessary to help kids make that incremental progress.
Yeah. It almost seems like it would be a good idea in this day and age for any school to make this part of the first few days of schools. Get some
Mm-hmm.
college blue books and pens and just let's just see what your writing looks like. Get a couple of
Yeah,
samples, file them away, and then for any future conversations about AI use or plagiarism, it's like, well, we have these handwritten samples of your
right.
writing,
Yeah, or even just to check in partway through, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and and that's where we use this as a tool for integrity, right? Rather than catching
Mm-hmm.
cheating, to be able to check in with the
Mm-hmm.
kid and say, look where you were
Right.
10 weeks ago and look where you are
Mm-hmm.
now. You are,
Yeah,
you're making such great progress with your
exactly.
writing here,
Mm-hmm.
right? We want to have those, those conversations. And affirming student work and giving feedback, that doesn't mean we have to grade, right? We're not grading the
Right.
work. We're not saying
Right.
grade pre-assessments. I heard Howard Gardner say many, many moons ago, we should assess kids all the time, but grade when you have to.
Mm.
So if the only time we're
Mhm.
giving feedback is when it comes with a grade, and there's a lot of research that supports it, kids look at the grade and ignore the feedback,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
So we've got to create those feedback loops, if we really want kids to focus on improvement. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next two almost go together. And this is 4.4 acknowledge. I'm sorry, no, 4.3 create clear boundaries for what resources can and cannot be used for formative and summative work. And
Hmm.
then later on, providing expectations for acknowledging those sources and
Yep.
outside help. So let's talk about this whole idea of sources and what are they and what should they do with them?
So I talk about this as clear boundaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't say here's the marathon course, but kind of you can go wherever you
Yeah.
want. So boundaries for acceptable and unacceptable use, right? For this assignment,
Mm-hmm.
I only want you to use a XYZ resource. I don't
Right.
want you using AI or whatever it may be, because if we've just said to kids, don't use I mean, they see other kids are and
Right.
they don't want to be left behind. So
Yeah.
being clear about what resources can be used, and then how they should be used, and that starts to push into most kids see AI tools as a super Google, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to plug in the question and I'll get the answer. Is
Right.
if that's not how we want kids using AI, then how we want them using AI tools, we need to teach them other ways, and I talk about a bunch of those in the book. But what does appropriate use look like? What are some ways that kids can use AI tools to receive feedback, or what you alluded to before, getting started? Because I've had a lot of jaw dropping experiences where I'll plug in an assignment and examples of student work and ask the AI tool to assess the work based on the success criteria. And I tell you, 999 times out of 1,000, it nails it.
Mm.
It nails it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Another thing that I've had about a 99% success rate: upload a PDF of the standards you're teaching to,
Mm.
and upload a PDF of your assignment or your assessment, and just prompt the AI tool, ChatGPT, Gemini, right, whatever you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
How well aligned is this assessment to the stated learning goals?
Mm.
It nails it.
Wow.
It absolutely nails it. So I don't want people to think I'm, just saying don't use AI. That's not what I'm
Yeah.
saying at all. But we've got to use them, use them appropriately. And then the final piece, right? Hold consistent, equitable expectations for transparency. So what I mean by that is this: if we're telling kids anytime you use I want you to upload the prompts that you used and the responses, which is something we need to do sometimes.
Mm.
But why don't you also say, if you received help at home, let me know what questions you asked. And again, because I can't teach you, if I think you're a world class marathoner and you want me to be your coach,
Mm.
I can't coach you well if my premise and assumptions about what you currently can and can't do are wrong, because we
Yeah.
give kids mixed messages about this, right? We
Mm.
tell kids on big major assignments, you have to cite your sources, you have to cite your sources. But oftentimes outside of English classes or the other 150 days a year in English classes, I often hear, and it's appropriate, use textual evidence from your book.
Mm-hmm.
Use your book, right? Don't just tell me what you think. Your book explains the three main okay, then create a norm where you say, if you are pulling information from your textbook or from the novel, where you say, from the textbook, blah blah
Right.
blah, boom. And that may seem like busy work, but we're headed into a space where what do you know and what can you do, and it's more important than ever, right, that we attribute
Yeah.
sources. And again, so if 95% of the time kids can turn in work without citing sources or saying where they got the information from, yet this other 5% of the time the stakes are high enough that if you don't do it
Mm.
right you could get an
Mm-hmm.
F in a class,
Mm.
there's a huge disconnect there. So
Right.
make it consistent.
Right. You're just building that academic habit, really,
Yeah,
of
yeah,
citing sources.
yeah, exactly.
Um, okay. And then the next one is consistently seek evidence of transparency and explainability.
Yep. So some examples I share in the article there. Transparency again. Kids need to be clear about what resources they used.
Mm-hmm.
So asking kids questions like, what process or strategies did you use to complete this assignment? List any resources, individuals, books, media technology, AI tools you used for this assignment or in this unit for this assessment. Attach any prompts and responses from AI tools with your completed
Mm-hmm.
work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just, again, if the only time we're asking kids to do those things is when we think we've caught them, the trust breaks down. And
Yeah.
so to just be consistent about asking kids those types of questions and having conversations about the resources they're using. And then gathering evidence of explainability. So these would be questions like, select an original quote from your writing that you're most proud of. Write the quote, explain your thinking in more detail. Now that you've completed this assignment, what do you think are the three most important things to know about this topic and
Mm.
why? Summarize your response or the most important ideas in your work in 50 words or less, right? It just creates that consistent message to kids that it's not just about the work,
Mm.
it's about the understanding that underlies that work, and we
Yeah.
want to know where they are. And again, then, right, make this the norm, not the exception. If the only time I'm going to a kid and saying, "Hey, what source did you use to get this?" Or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, "I don't think you did this work. Do you really understand this?"
Right.
If we're doing that as a pretext to an accusation, that's just really heavy. It's hard for the teacher to do, which I know
Yeah.
teachers will tell you, and which I know teachers will also say why they're reluctant oftentimes to confront
Right.
cheating, right? But if I'm a kid and I actually buckled down and did that work, and that's my teacher's response, right? That undermines trust as well. So
Mm-hmm.
again, when Rosie was interviewed after that race, no one was accusing her of cheating. She was being
Right.
asked the same questions you would ask any winner.
Mm-hmm.
How
How
did
did
you
you
train?
train?
How did you get
Yeah.
ready? How did you improve? What did you see on the course today that you thought was interesting or surprised
Right.
you? Or those are just good questions to
Yeah.
ask. They aren't accusations.
So
But
just making that a normal part of class is
yeah,
just
yeah,
having those conversations.
yep.
Yeah.
And if the kids can't answer,
Mm,
well, that tells us something. And I
right.
talk about that in the final piece. But the other piece, I alluded to it before. As soon as we give kids a grade, they tend to be done with the work. There's
Mm,
absolutely nothing that says when a kid turns something in, it has to be graded, right?
yeah.
So when a kid turns something in, to look it through and then ask some of those follow-up questions, or after they've uploaded maybe their work, right? The final part of this assignment, maybe it's an in-class writing, maybe, but that notion of some of those questions I asked before, what did you learn from this assignment? What's the most
Mm,
important thing about topic X? Or,
yeah.
and oftentimes in student projects, when students, do the PowerPoint presentation, or, they build a model of something, or writes, but those more project-based pieces, oftentimes the evidence that's in front of us isn't necessarily evidence of learning. We have to ask those probing questions
Yeah.
to find out if they really do understand something about ancient Greece and its
Mm,
history and culture
mm-hmm.
by looking at the urn. because that product in and of itself often doesn't tell us much. So
Yeah. Yeah. I would think too that these conversations could help us revise our assignments for future,
hmm
to make them have more of that element in it.
I
Yeah.
had a teacher just yesterday say, my students didn't do very well on this part of the rubric, and I think we need to change how we're assessing this next year. And I just
Mm,
like sit up and
yeah.
applaud, right? Because it wasn't the kids weren't paying attention, or we need to change the rubric,
Mm,
right? The
mm-hmm.
descriptor in the rubric really captured the essence of quality for that standard. That
Mm-hmm.
reflection of, whoa, that's feedback to me, that
Yes.
maybe we didn't teach that. I didn't teach it as well as I'd
Mm-hmm.
intended, and I need to make that clearer, next year. That was great reflection.
Yeah, sometimes we have very rigid ideas of what an assignment needs to look like too. It's an essay. Like, why could it not be an essay with another side thing that you also do, or your own little commentary about, there's all different things. It can be in different chunks. It doesn't have to just be this one thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so for example, was working with some teachers. They're making trading cards. It was like they were making
Mm,
like Pokemon cards for
mm,
individuals from the Renaissance, and they had to
okay.
talk about their background and then like give them rating points for creativity and right.
Yeah.
But that's an example of something that AI can do.
Yeah.
Right? AI can do that. So
Yeah.
maybe the assessment is okay. Let AI do that, and then print that on a page.
Mm-hmm.
Then the kid needs to go and fact check and annotate. Were the facts that the
There
AI
you
tool shared,
go.
were they correct?
Yeah.
And do you agree or disagree with the ratings? For these different attributes that the
That's
AI
excellent.
gave,
Yeah.
right? So again, it's not saying AI good or bad, or if a student is using AI, it's cheating. It's that intentionality, because right, if the purpose is hook kids with a project that gets them thinking about this individual beyond
Mm-hmm.
just the facts, then we have to think, how can I create an experience where that's the evidence that the kids are going to give me, not
Yeah.
just that the AI tool can give it to me.
Right. Right. That's great. So our last piece of advice is to frame integrity as the basis of your partnership for effective teaching and learning.
Yeah, and this is language that's similar to actually what I used when I taught statistics to doctoral students.
Yeah. Do you want to read that? This is the language in your syllabus, or?
Yep, and this is
Mhm.
what I'm recommending. Yep, that teachers could put into their syllabus, right?
Yes.
As so, it's this. It's important that you submit your own work so I can provide meaningful feedback to you to inform your next efforts to learn. If I don't know what you do or don't know, I can't adjust my instruction to better support your learning. It's okay to not know. It's okay to ask questions. If you knew this already, there'd be no need for you to take this class. Academic integrity means you own what you know, acknowledge what you don't, and are transparent about the ideas or words that you use that were drawn from others' work or through the use of AI tools. Sometimes I'll ask you to retrace your steps so I can affirm or assist with the process you've used to complete a task. I'll always ask you to cite your sources. I'll always expect you to give credit to others or to a technology tool when credit is due. Academic dishonesty involves any attempt to take credit for knowledge or skills that you don't actually possess or own. If you cannot explain your work after it's been completed, it may or may not be evidence of academic dishonesty. However, it is evidence that you haven't internalized that knowledge or those skills yet. And if that is the case, I need to know so I can help you take the next steps necessary to learn. Right? And that's the bond that we want with our learners. And the notion of fidelity, I think sometimes it gets a bad rap, because I think sometimes we talk about fidelity as following the curriculum in a lockstep way.
Yeah.
And that's not at all. That's not what I mean when I say fidelity. But that notion of fidelity is a shared understanding of reality, right? And I can't teach you if I don't know what you truly do or don't know. And if that can't be our pact, right? If you are stuck, I want to know because I want to help you, not because I want to judge you. If you're stuck, I want to know. That's got to be the goal. And I know that's hard to do, and I've been there. That's hard to do with 120 students or 150 students.
Yep.
But a couple of things. If we do break these pieces down in some of the ways that I've talked about, that doesn't mean we're spending entire weekends assessing hundreds and hundreds of pages of papers. We can capture some of this evidence in sentences here and there, and in conversations, and in just how we communicate to kids what's important. But another piece is there are also some pretty cool ways you can use AI tools to support some of this. And if I firmly believe that teachers should look for ways to use AI tools, not just to create efficiency, but effectiveness first, right? Then efficiency. Because we're overworked and we're stressed out, and teaching is challenging, and most of what we know about what works in schools and learning is kind of the essence of one-on-one tutoring. The challenge is bringing those things to scale. So I absolutely think teachers should look for ways to use AI tools that can support in some of these things, and giving feedback and et cetera. But we can't in turn pretend like kids aren't also stressed out and overwhelmed. And so, let's make a pact that we're going to use these tools, but we're going to use them in ways that are clear and transparent. And we're going to use them in ways that don't threaten my capacity to build my expertise, to continue to build my expertise as a teacher. Right? And that students aren't using them in ways that undermine their efforts to engage in the productive struggle that results in learning. But they're here, and they're going to be more and more ubiquitous, and they're going to be more and more powerful. So again, let's keep focused on what we know about effective teaching and learning, and find ways to use these tools in ways that help us all.
The book is called AI with Intention. Tony Frontier, where can people find you online if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, the book is available. You'll have a link to the book through the podcast. TonyFrontier.com. You can shoot me an email at TonyFrontier@gmail.com. I got a bunch of presentations and workshops coming up. Just Google me and you'll see what's going on.
All right. And you've written a spectacular guest post over on Cult of Pedagogy, and then we will have links to the book and to your socials and everything like that, so people can continue to engage with you that way. Thank you so much. This has been a really, really good conversation.
Thank you. I've always enjoyed your work, and glad we had the opportunity to connect here. So thank you very much.
For links to Tony's book and to read his post with all the strategies we talked about here, visit cultofpedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 251. To get a regular email from me about my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, courses, and products, sign up for my mailing list at cultofpedagogy.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.